January 17, 1945. Hürtgen Forest, German-Belgian border. The air is iron and ice. Snow falls in thick, muffled curtains through the skeletal remains of fir trees, their trunks shattered by weeks of artillery fire. The ground is no longer earth. It is frozen mud, churned and refrozen into cruel ridges that cut through boot leather. In this gray throat of winter, a Wehrmacht patrol moves in silence. 15 men. Faces wrapped in whatever fabric they could scavenge. Breath rising in pale clouds that vanish as quickly as hope. Obergefreiter Ernst Kleist leads them, though lead is perhaps too strong a word. He simply walks first. His Kar 98K rifle feels heavier each day, not because the weapon has changed, but because his arms have thinned. Behind him, the men carry between them what remains of their world. 3 belts of machine gun ammunition, 2 potato masher grenades with questionable fuses, and half a loaf of bread so hard it could stop shrapnel. They have been cut off from their company for 6 days. The radio man died on the 2nd day, not from a bullet, but from the cold that crawled into his lungs and froze them from the inside. Kleist had fought in France in 1940. He remembered victory then. Remembered the taste of wine in Burgundy cellars, the stunned faces of French soldiers who threw down their weapons rather than face the Blitzkrieg's mechanical fury. He remembered believing, truly believing, that Germany was reshaping the world into something newer, cleaner, more efficient. That was a lifetime ago. Now in January 1945, the only thing being reshaped is his understanding of what war actually costs. The patrol stops. Ahead, through the falling snow, movement. American voices, young, casual, frighteningly close. The Wehrmacht's experience in the first years of the war had been one of intoxicating speed. Poland fell in 5 weeks. France, that ancient enemy, that fortress of European pride, collapsed in 6. The Blitzkrieg doctrine was not merely military strategy. It was proof of concept, ideological validation made manifest in tank treads and dive bomber sirens. German soldiers in 1940 and 1941 did not simply fight. They demonstrated. They showed the world what efficiency looked like, what happened when a nation committed itself entirely to the ruthless application of force. But efficiency is a god that demands constant sacrifice. By 1942, the Eastern Front had begun to devour German strength. By 1943, the Mediterranean campaigns revealed that Italy was not an ally but an anchor. And by late 1944, when American forces had liberated France and were pressing toward the Rhine, German soldiers like Kleist found themselves on the wrong end of a mathematics problem they could not solve. The United States had entered the war late, yes, but it entered completely. American industrial capacity was not simply larger than Germany's. It was a different species of production entirely. In 1944, American factories produced more war material than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. This was not a matter of willpower or ideology. It was a matter of resources, yes, but more than that. It was a matter of systems. Systems that did not merely extract and produce, but that learned, adapted, and accelerated. German soldiers on the Western Front in early 1945 had heard rumors about American logistics. Some believed them. Most did not. The human mind resists information that contradicts its foundational assumptions. If you have been told your entire adult life that your nation represents the pinnacle of organization, that your military is the most sophisticated instrument of war ever devised, it is difficult, perhaps impossible, to accept that somewhere across an ocean, a democracy of shopkeepers and farmers has built something more powerful. Kleist crouches behind the hollow shell of a burned-out Panther tank, German, abandoned weeks ago when the fuel ran out. He signals his men to spread out. Through the snow, he can see them now. U.S. Marines, perhaps 20 of them, establishing a position near what used to be a logging road. They are not frantic. They are not desperate. They move with the easy confidence of men who know more is coming, and then Kleist sees it. The convoy arrives without fanfare. 6 trucks, deuce and a halves, the Americans call them. GMC CCKW-2, a half-ton cargo trucks, painted in flat olive drab, their engines rumbling through the winter silence like distant thunder that refuses to fade. They pull into the clearing where the Marines are waiting, and what happens next is so ordinary, so unremarkable to the Americans that they barely pause in their conversations. The truck's rear gates drop. Crates begin to emerge. Not a few. Not a careful rationing. Crates of ammunition. 30 caliber, 45 ACP, 60 mortar rounds. Crates of rations, C-rations in wax-lined boxes, coffee, sugar, cigarettes, medical supplies, replacement uniforms. Gasoline in jerry cans, stacked like casual abundance. And then, impossibly, a crate of fresh oranges. Kleist watches from 200 meters away. His hand, wrapped in a rag because his gloves wore through 3 weeks ago, grips the frozen metal of his rifle. Beside him, Gefreiter Vogel, a Berliner, a baker's son who joined the Wehrmacht because the alternative was the Volkssturm, whispers in a voice that cracks. That's more than our entire battalion had in December. It is not an exaggeration. The German logistics network by January 1945 was not a network at all. It was a series of desperate improvisations held together by requisition orders that often went unfilled. The railways, once the pride of German efficiency, were being systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. Fuel for vehicles was so scarce that horses had returned to the battlefield. But even horses needed feed, and feed required transport, and transport required fuel. It was a circle that spiraled inward, tightening, suffocating. The Americans unload with mechanical ease. A Marine, not an officer, just a corporal, checks a clipboard and shouts something about second drop by 1400 hours. Second drop. The phrase hangs in the frozen air. There will be more. There is always more. Kleist had expected to face American courage. He had prepared himself to fight American determination. What he had not prepared for, what no amount of ideological training could have prepared him for, was American abundance. This was not simply having more bullets. It was a different philosophy of war. The Americans did not ask their soldiers to endure cold without coats, hunger without food, exhaustion without rest. They did not romanticize suffering. They solved it. One of the Marines pulls an orange from the crate and bites into it, peel and all, juice running down his chin in the freezing air. He laughs at something another Marine says. Kleist cannot hear the words, but the laughter carries. It is the sound of men who believe tomorrow will come. There is a document, now held in the U.S. National Archives, a German Army report from February 1945, written by a staff officer in Army Group B. The report is dry, technical, the kind of bureaucratic language that militaries use to describe catastrophe without acknowledging it. It reads, "Enemy supply lines appear unlimited in capacity. Our interdiction efforts yield minimal results. Enemy forward units routinely demonstrate access to materiel in quantities that suggest strategic reserves are being deployed at tactical level." What the report does not say, because military reports do not traffic in emotion, is what this meant to the men who faced it. It meant watching American soldiers discard half-full magazines because fresh ones were easier than conservation. It meant hearing American artillery fire not in careful, calculated barrages, but in rolling, endless walls of steel that turned entire hillsides into moonscapes. It meant seeing American tanks, Shermans, good but not exceptional machines, succeed through sheer numbers, through the knowledge that if one was destroyed, 2 more would arrive by morning. The ideological core of National Socialism rested on several pillars. Racial superiority, yes. Lebensraum, the quest for living space, yes. But beneath these, supporting them, was a foundational belief in German organizational supremacy. The myth of Prussian efficiency. The idea that discipline, order, and will could overcome material deficits, that a motivated, ideologically pure soldier was worth 3 of the enemy's conscripts. The Western Front in 1945 shattered this mythology not through words but through oranges, through fresh socks, through hot coffee, through the mundane, relentless, crushing superiority of a system that valued keeping its soldiers fed, warm, and supplied not as reward, but as baseline operational necessity. Kleist makes a decision. They cannot fight 20 Marines, not with 15 exhausted men who have shared half a loaf of bread in 2 days. They cannot retreat east without encountering more American forces. So they will do what German soldiers in the war's final months increasingly did. They will attempt to survive until surrender becomes possible. But first, they will watch. Because seeing this, truly seeing it, is important in a way that Kleist does not yet have words for. The convoy leaves. The Marines remain, establishing their position with practiced ease. Kleist observes one Marine setting up a small field stove, a portable gasoline burner, something so simple and so impossible for German forces that it might as well be alien technology. The Marine heats water, makes coffee. The smell drifts through the forest, rich and dark and utterly civilian. It is a smell that says, "We have enough that we can waste fuel on comfort." Gefreiter Vogel beside Kleist closes his eyes. When he opens them, there are no tears. It is too cold for tears, but his voice is hollow. We were told they were soft, that democracies make men weak. Kleist does not reply immediately. He is remembering a briefing from 1943, a speech given by an SS officer to a group of Wehrmacht NCOs. The officer had been passionate, eloquent even. He spoke of American culture as mongrelized, American society as decadent, American military force as quantity without quality. "They have factories," the officer had said, "but not spirit. They have money but not sacrifice. When real hardship comes, they will crumble." The officer had believed it. Kleist had believed it. They all had, because belief was easier than the alternative. But here, in a frozen forest in January 1945, watching a Marine drink coffee that was made simply because coffee was available, Kleist understands something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. They had mistaken comfort for weakness. They had assumed that a nation which gave its soldiers oranges and fresh socks was soft, when in fact it was the opposite. It was a nation so strong, so confident in its productive capacity, that it could afford to treat its soldiers like human beings rather than expendable components. The symbolic weight of an orange. It is a strange thing to anchor understanding to fruit, but symbols are what the mind grasps when reality is too large to hold directly. That orange, bright against the gray snow, casual in the Marine's hand, represented something more than vitamin C or a pleasant taste. It represented a supply chain that stretched from California groves to Belgian forests without breaking. It represented a society that could wage industrial war on 3 continents while still ensuring that fresh fruit reached frontline troops. It represented the terrible power of a system that did not require its people to suffer in order to succeed. German war production in 1944 and 1945 operated on the principle of total sacrifice. Civilians ate turnips so soldiers could have bread. Soldiers ate bread so officers could have meat. Officers ate meat so the war could continue. Every meal was a calculation, every supply decision a negotiation with scarcity. The home front and the war front were locked in a zero-sum competition for resources that were never enough. American war production operated on a different principle. There is enough, and we will make more. The United States in World War II did not merely mobilize its economy, it transformed it. Automobile factories became tank factories. Typewriter manufacturers made rifles. A nation that had been struggling through the Depression discovered that it had not been poor, it had been underutilized. When fully mobilized, American industrial capacity was so vast that it supplied not only its own military, but became the arsenal of democracy for Britain, the Soviet Union, and dozens of other allied nations. This was not propaganda. This was not exaggeration. By 1944, the United States was producing one ship per day, one aircraft every 5 minutes, and a tank every 7 minutes. These numbers are so large they become abstract. Kleist, watching from his frozen hollow, understands them only as oranges and coffee and the casual way the Marines speak of a second delivery. Hours pass. The snow continues. Kleist's patrol remains hidden, not because they are planning an attack, but because they have nowhere else to go. As evening approaches, another element of American force arrives. A liaison team with a radio so sophisticated it might as well be magic. The radio man, another Marine, young, probably not yet 20, sets up the equipment with board efficiency. Within minutes, he is in contact with battalion headquarters. Kleist can hear only the tone, not the words, but the tone tells him everything. It is conversational, routine. The radio man is reporting positions, requesting air support for tomorrow's advance, confirming supply schedules. He does this while eating a chocolate bar. German communications by January 1945 were fragmentary at best. Radio sets were in short supply. Codes were compromised. Entire divisions operated on runner-based communication, men literally sprinting through artillery fire to carry handwritten messages because the alternative did not exist. And here, at what the Americans probably considered a minor forward position, a corporal had better communication equipment than most German regimental commanders. Vogel whispers, "How do we fight this?" It is the right question. It is also unanswerable. The National Socialist ideology had promised that willpower could overcome material disadvantage, that the superior German soldier, motivated by racial consciousness and national destiny, would triumph through courage and tactical skill. This was not entirely wrong. German tactical proficiency in World War II was often exceptional. German soldiers, on average, were well-trained, disciplined, and effective at small unit operations. But tactics cannot defeat logistics. Courage cannot defeat supply chains. At a certain scale, war stops being about individual battles and becomes about systems. The Americans had built a system that was so robust, so redundant, so overwhelming that it did not require tactical brilliance. It required only competence and patience. The Marines in that clearing were probably not better soldiers, man for man, than Kleist's patrol. But the Marines had radios that worked, food that was fresh, ammunition that was plentiful, and the absolute certainty that if they needed help, it would arrive. That certainty, that psychological foundation, was perhaps the most devastating weapon in the American arsenal. A soldier who knows he is supported fights differently than a soldier who knows he is alone. The former takes calculated risks. The latter takes desperate ones or no risks at all. Night falls. Kleist makes the decision. They will surrender in the morning. Not because they are cowards. Several of his men have iron crosses, decorations earned in combat that was as real and terrible as any in history, but because continuing to fight has stopped making sense. The mathematics are clear. They can kill perhaps 2 or 3 Marines before being overwhelmed. And then what? The Marines will call in artillery or air support, and Kleist's patrol will be erased from the world. Or they can survive, and perhaps someday return to whatever Germany becomes after this is over. But before sleep, though sleep in this cold is more like brief unconsciousness, Kleist allows himself to think about the food. Not strategically, not as a soldier analyzing enemy capabilities, just as a human being who is hungry. He remembers the last real meal he had, October 1944, a farmhouse in eastern Belgium. The owners had fled. His squad found potatoes in the cellar, a miracle. They boiled them and divided them precisely. Each man received the same portion, weighed by hand, because fairness mattered when there was so little. The potatoes were watery and bland, but they were hot, and for 30 minutes Kleist had not been hungry. The Marines in that clearing had eaten better today than Kleist had eaten in 3 months, and tomorrow they would eat the same, and the day after. This was not special. This was normal. This was what being an American soldier meant. There is a diary entry, recovered after the war, written by a German lieutenant in early 1945. The diary was found in a bombed-out house near Aachen. The lieutenant's name has been lost, but his words remain. We were told America was weak, that their soldiers would not endure hardship. Now I understand the lie. They do not need to endure hardship. They have eliminated it. This is not weakness. This is power we cannot match. The lieutenant died 3 days after writing that entry. Artillery, probably American, definitely effective. Morning, January 18, 1945. The snow has stopped. The sky is white, featureless, neither day nor night but some exhausted space between. Kleist stands. His men watch him, understanding without words. He removes the bolt from his rifle, the traditional signal of surrender, making the weapon inoperable, and holds it above his head. Then he walks forward slowly, hands visible, into the American position. The Marines react with startling speed, weapons up, shouts in English that Kleist does not understand but whose meaning is clear. He stops, waits. Behind him, his men emerge from the tree line, hands raised, faces hollow. A Marine lieutenant approaches, young, younger than Kleist. The lieutenant looks at the German patrol, at their threadbare uniforms, their visible exhaustion, their hunger. Kleist expects many things. Contempt, perhaps, anger. What he does not expect is what the lieutenant actually says in broken but functional German: medic, food, then processing. The Marines do not celebrate, they do not mock. They process the surrender with the same casual efficiency they applied to unloading trucks. A medic checks each German soldier for wounds, for frostbite. They are given blankets. American blankets, wool, warm. They are given food, K-rations, not fresh but far better than anything they have eaten in weeks. Kleist receives a tin of ham and eggs, a packet of crackers, instant coffee. He eats slowly, because eating quickly after starvation causes illness, but also because he needs to remember this, needs to understand it. One of the Marines, a sergeant with a face that suggests Italian ancestry, offers Kleist a cigarette. Kleist takes it. The tobacco is American, smooth, mild, nothing like the harsh German ersatz tobacco that was more sawdust than leaves. They smoke in silence. The sergeant does not speak German. Kleist does not speak English. But the cigarette is a language both understand. The patrol is moved to a rear area by truck, American truck, riding in the back where yesterday there had been supplies. They pass through zones of American military presence that stagger understanding. Field hospitals with actual beds, supply dumps with mountains of crates, vehicle parks with rows of tanks, trucks, jeeps, all in working order, all fueled, all maintained. It is not the quantity alone. It is the organization, the cleanliness, the lack of desperation. Vogel, sitting beside Kleist in the truck bed, says quietly, "We never had a chance, did we?" Kleist considers lying, considers offering some platitude about German courage or fighting spirit or the righteousness of their cause. But he is too tired and the lie is too heavy. "No," he says, "not after 1941. That date is significant. 1941 was when the United States entered the war. Before that, perhaps, if Germany had consolidated its gains, made peace with Britain, avoided the Soviet trap, perhaps then. But once America committed its full industrial and economic weight to the Allied cause, the outcome became mathematical. Not immediately, not obviously, but inevitably. There is a statistical analysis conducted after the war by military historians that calculated what was called the production differential. By 1944, the United States and its allies were outproducing the Axis powers by a factor of approximately 5-1 in heavy weapons, 3-1 in aircraft, and 7-1 in naval tonnage. These numbers do not account for qualitative factors, for tactical skill or strategic genius. They are simply the mathematics of industrial war. Germany had bet everything on speed, on winning decisively before material superiority could be brought to bear. When the Blitzkrieg failed to achieve total victory, when the war became one of attrition, of production, of logistics, Germany's defeat was not a question of if, but when. Kleist had not understood this in 1940. Few did. The intoxication of victory was too strong. But here, in January 1945, riding in an American truck toward a POW camp, wrapped in an American blanket, his stomach full of American food, the understanding is unavoidable. The POW camp is near Liege, Belgium. It is not comfortable, no prison camp is, but it is organized. The prisoners receive 2 meals a day, adequate calories, medical care. They sleep in heated barracks. They are processed according to the Geneva Convention with bureaucratic precision. Kleist will spend the next 4 months here, and then be transferred to a camp in France. And eventually, in late 1946, he will be repatriated to Germany. But on his 3rd day in the camp, something happens that he will remember more clearly than most of his combat experiences. A shipment of Red Cross parcels arrives. These are standard: food, cigarettes, small comforts. But this shipment includes something unexpected: books. Books in German shipped by the Americans, distributed to German prisoners. Kleist receives a copy of Goethe's poetry, not propaganda, not anti-Nazi literature. Goethe. German culture, given to German prisoners by American captors. He sits on his bunk and reads Wanderer's Nachtlied, Wanderer's Night Song. The poem is short, simple, about peace and rest and the quiet of evening mountains. It was written in 1780, long before nations became machines, before ideology became identity. It speaks of a world where suffering ends and rest comes. Kleist cries. It is the first time since 1942. The transformation that occurs in men like Kleist is not sudden. It is not a dramatic reversal. It is more like erosion, water wearing stone slowly, until the shape is different and cannot be changed back. He had believed, once, in German superiority, believed that the National Socialist system represented a new and better organization of human society. These beliefs were not purely imposed from above. They were reinforced by experience. The victories of 1939 and 1940 seemed to prove that the system worked. The propaganda was effective because it aligned with observable reality, at least at first. But reality is more complex than propaganda. The victories stopped. The costs mounted. And eventually, Kleist found himself watching American Marines eat oranges in a forest where German soldiers starved, and the contradiction could not be resolved through ideology alone. This cognitive shift was not unique to Kleist. It occurred across hundreds of thousands of German soldiers in the war's final years. The Nazi regime had promised that sacrifice would lead to triumph, that hardship was noble, that victory was inevitable. When these promises collapsed, not through argument but through lived experience, the ideological structure collapsed with them. Some soldiers responded with radicalization, clinging more desperately to belief as evidence contradicted it. But many, perhaps most, simply stopped believing. They continued to fight because orders and consequences left little choice, but the inner conviction was gone. They became, in the war's last months, men going through motions they no longer believed in, waiting for an end they knew was coming. There is a broader truth here, one that extends beyond Kleist, beyond World War II, into the deep structure of how societies function and fail. National Socialism was, among other things, an ideology of scarcity. It promised that Germany needed more land, more resources, more space. It portrayed the world as a zero-sum competition where one nation's gain was another's loss. This worldview justified aggression, justified atrocity, justified war as not merely acceptable but necessary. The American system that Kleist encountered, imperfect, flawed but undeniably powerful, operated on a different assumption. Abundance is achievable, not through conquest but through production, not through taking but through making. The United States in World War II demonstrated that a relatively free economy, when fully mobilized, could generate material wealth on a scale that made the ideologies of scarcity look not just wrong but obsolete. This was not solely about capitalism versus other systems. The Soviet Union, after all, also produced prodigious amounts of war material. But the American approach was distinctive in how it treated human beings within the system. American soldiers were not asked to glorify suffering. They were given tools to minimize it. They were supplied not just adequately but abundantly. They were treated as valuable assets to be maintained, not expendable components to be consumed. This was not altruism. It was pragmatism. A well-fed, well-equipped soldier is more effective than a starving, desperate one. A soldier who believes he will be supported takes smarter risks than one who believes he is alone. The American military logistics system was not kind because kindness was valued, though perhaps it was, but because effectiveness was valued, and it turns out effectiveness requires treating people like people. Years later, in 1967, Ernst Kleist will be interviewed by a historian researching German soldiers' experiences on the Western Front. The interview is recorded on tape that now sits in an archive in Munich. Kleist is 53 years old. He runs a small bookstore in Cologne. He has never joined a political party after the war. He does not attend veterans' reunions. The historian asks him what the turning point was when he stopped believing in German victory. Kleist is silent for almost 30 seconds. Then he says, January 1945. I watched Americans unload oranges in a Belgian forest, not for officers, for ordinary soldiers, and I realized we were not fighting an army. We were fighting a civilization that had already won. The historian asks what he means. Kleist struggles to articulate it. Finally, they had made war boring, routine, like factory work. There was no glory in it for them, just checklists and supply schedules. And that was more terrifying than any battle cry, because you cannot defeat a system that treats war like accounting. It is a profound observation. The romantic view of war and National Socialism was deeply romantic in its aesthetic, portrays conflict as heroic, transformative, clarifying. War as poetry, as struggle that reveals truth and builds character. The American approach, at least logistically, was anti-romantic. War as problem to be solved. War as engineering challenge. War as series of obstacles requiring resources, planning, and execution. There were individual heroes, yes, individual moments of courage. But the system did not rely on heroism. It relied on coordination. This was alien to German military culture, which prized initiative, audacity, individual command decisions. The German ideal of Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics, where subordinates were given objectives and left to determine methods, had been devastatingly effective in mobile warfare. But it could not overcome systemic material inferiority. You cannot Auftragstaktik your way past empty fuel tanks. The epilogue to Kleist's story is quiet. He returns to Germany in 1946. The country is shattered, physically, morally, spiritually. He finds his family alive, which is more than many can say. He does not speak much about the war. He reads. He opens the bookstore in 1950. He stocks German classics, American novels in translation, French philosophy. He marries in 1952, has 2 children, lives an unremarkable life that feels, after what he has seen, like a kind of grace. But he never forgets the oranges. In 1963, he takes his son to a market in Cologne and buys a bag of oranges, Spanish, imported, affordable. He gives one to his son, watches him peel it. The boy eats it casually, carelessly, the way children eat fruit when fruit is simply available. And Kleist feels something complex, gratitude, grief, wonder. He is grateful to live in a world where his son can eat an orange without it meaning anything. Grief for the world where it meant everything. And wonder that such transformations are possible, that a civilization can rebuild, can change, can move from scarcity to abundance not through conquest but through cooperation and work. The lesson is not simple. It is not democracy always wins, or logistics defeat ideology, or any other neat formulation. The lesson is that systems which treat human dignity as compatible with efficiency are more powerful than systems which demand sacrifice as proof of commitment. National Socialism asked its adherents to prove their loyalty through suffering, to demonstrate their superiority through endurance. It romanticized hardship and pain. It made a virtue of scarcity. The American system, imperfect, often unjust, deeply flawed in numerous ways, nevertheless operated on the principle that unnecessary suffering was a problem to solve, not a virtue to celebrate. It did not ask soldiers to starve to prove their courage. It fed them and then asked them to fight. This is not a small distinction. It is not merely tactical. It is philosophical. It reflects fundamentally different understandings of what human beings are for, what society should provide, what civilization means. And in that frozen forest in January 1945, watching American trucks unload supplies that seemed infinite, Kleist encountered this distinction not as abstract philosophy, but as oranges and coffee, and the casual confidence of men who knew tomorrow would come. He surrendered not because he was weak, but because he understood. The war ended 4 months later. Millions were dead. Cities were ruins. The maps of Europe were redrawn. And in the decades that followed, Germany rebuilt, democratized, prospered. It became, in time, one of the wealthiest and most stable nations in Europe, not through conquest but through cooperation. Not through glorifying scarcity but through creating abundance. Kleist lived to see it. He died in 1989, just months before the Berlin Wall fell. His last words to his son were reportedly, "Don't waste food. But don't worship it either, just let it be what it is. An orange is just an orange, except when it is not, except when it is a symbol of systems and choices and the quiet power of treating people as worth feeding. Except when it is the thing that breaks an ideology and opens a possibility of something different." In the end, that is what Kleist carried from that frozen forest, not trauma alone, though there was trauma, not shame alone, though there was shame, but also the knowledge, hard-won and irrevocable, that another way was possible. That abundance could be built, not stolen. That freedom and efficiency were not opposites but partners. The Americans never knew his name. He was one more prisoner in one more camp, a statistic in the vast machinery of war's conclusion. But he knew theirs, not individually but collectively. He knew what they represented, and in knowing he was changed. That change, multiplied across millions, rebuilt a continent. It is still